Howdy folks, Spencer here, and today I'll be giving you my thoughts as to whether the 15th anniversary bundle is worth picking up, or if you're better picking up some of the ships standalone. As always, chapters to each topic are listed below. And before I get too far into things, for the ship collectors here, Real Merch has just received some more Eagle Moss inventory and has some popular models back in stock, including some of the STO models like the USS Avenger and the very popular USS Aventine Vesta class. If you're interested, I'll have an affiliate link in the pinned comment below, along with a discount code that can get you 5% off your first order. Originally, my intention was to have a full review of this bundle out by the end of the week. However, I had some family issues pop up, and I was unable to get on and work on any YouTube stuff Wednesday through late Friday. Full reviews will still be incoming over the next 1 to 2 weeks, but I know many of you are wanting an answer right now as to whether or not this bundle is worth it, and that is exactly what this video is going to provide. Now, right off the bat, I'll tell you that I don't think this bundle is worth it, at least not at the introductory 25% sale cost here of 13,125 Zen. That's around 130 bucks. That is 2 AAA games. And they're not exactly providing the strongest bundle ever here. Like I've said in my prior videos on it, this is the weakest anniversary bundle we have seen since the 11th anniversary. Now, with me saying that, keep in mind, this is not the worst bundle ever. It's just also not the strongest. It is somewhere in the middle. This is more of a fun theme RP style bundle, and if that's what you're into, that's perfectly fine. My recommendation is that if you do end up wanting to go for the entire bundle, then you need to wait for a future 35% bundle sale, which will take it down to 11,375 Zen. The reason I say that is because they have again cheaped out on the Tier 6X upgrades in the bundle, only providing 5 when you'll need 15 to fully upgrade the 5 Tier 6 ships in the bundle. So if you do want it, just wait for a better bundle sale and use that extra 1,750 Zen on some Phoenix packs to pick up some T6X upgrades with the next Phoenix event. And next up, I want to recap the bundle contents. Now, thankfully with this bundle, like with the past couple of anniversary bundles, the 4 new ships are able to be acquired individually on their own in the Zen store. So the Pioneer, the Ark Royal, the Corolla, and the Shangri-La, those can all be acquired for 3,000 Zen apiece or with a Tier 6 coupon, if you don't want to go for the entire bundle. And thankfully, the alternative skins you see listed here for the Pioneer 2 and the Ark Royal are included with the standalone C-Store version. There is no exclusive variants tied to the bundle. Now, as for the bundle exclusives and the other bundle contents, the big exclusive here is the Theseus Miracle Worker Destroyer as an account-wide unlock, plus the exclusive Theseus prototype skin for that. So the Theseus is an Infinity Lockbox ship. It is not one that was very well received, but it is a very capable destroyer, especially if you're not into the Uncon meta. If you're into the Uncon meta, then there are better destroyers out there, like the Atlantis Temporal Destroyer in the Zen store. But if you're more into the Isomag style builds where you're not as reliant on universal consoles and the clickies from them, then this is a ship that I think you'd like. And then you've got the Tier 2 Exeter Cruiser refit. So traditionally that's going to cost you dilithium, but it is in here so that you get that skin for the Shangri-La. And then there is some other bundle exclusives here, the Federation Type 2 Phaser Pistol, the Starfleet Armored Security Guard uniform, and then the Cowboy Diplomat title. And alongside that, you're going to get 15 Master Keys. These are bound to you. 15 Ultimate Tech upgrades, also bound to you. The ship upgrades are not bound. The Starship slots are going to automatically open up onto the character unless you're at the 75 ship slot cap, in which case it'll then put them in a box, which you can then put in your account bank to move to a different character. And then there is a Tier 6 ship coupon, and so long as you leave that in the box, it is going to be unbound, so you could sell or trade it. And lastly, there is 100 Lobby crystals. Ultimately, just like with the 14th bundle, the bundle exclusives aren't the most appealing, so it only makes sense to go for the entire bundle if you're either interested in at least 3 of the ships or the overall theme. And during a 35% bundle sale, if you include the Tier 6 coupon, that's 6 Tier 6 ships, 15 ultimate upgrades, 15 keys, and the other fluff for 11,375 Zen, or just over 110 bucks. Still very expensive, but far from the worst value we've seen in this game. Now, heading over to the 4 new ships, as I just said in the prior section, these ships can be acquired standalone. You do not have to buy the bundle to get them. And given that I've already done a stats breakdown for these ships and will be taking a deep dive into the stats again with my upcoming reviews, what I'll be doing here today is going over the playstyles each of these ships are good at and the performance of their accessories from the testing I've done so far. First up here is going to be the Shangri-La Command Warship. So this has a 5-3 weapon setup, and for the bridge officers, you have a Commander Tac with Command, a Lieutenant Commander Tactical with Pilot, Lieutenant Commander Engineer, Lieutenant Universal, and an Ensign Universal. So the weaknesses here is that if this specialization seating had been flipped around, it would have been really good for the current Torp meta. Again, right now, because of the Eagle console, Torps want a Commander Pilot and then a Lieutenant Commander Command, so that is a missed opportunity there. And the other weakness here is the second specialization seat should really have been on the Engineer. A Lieutenant Commander Engineer with no specialization seating on it is not the greatest thing. Now, as for the rest of the seating, not having the ability to run a Gravwell is unfortunate for the ship, but the bridge officer seating here, while it's not perfect, it is still very capable. So as for what playstyles this is going to be good for, if you're doing classical torps, so what we did pre-Eagle basically, then this is going to be fine for that. With the Commander Command, that means you can run Suppression Barrage, so you could set this up as a tank if you wanted. There's certainly enough tac seating there and Inge that you could do that. You could also just set it up in general for Directed Energy Weapons, so that's, Beam Overload, Fire at Will, Cannon Scatter Volley, Cannon Rapid Fire. Generally, we just abbreviate them all as Directed Energy Weapons. So for any of those, it's going to be fine. It's going to be a fine tank platform if you're looking for a tac-focused tank. Even though the hull modifier is not the highest, you would still be able to make it work. And again, for the classical torps, it's not going to be perfect, but it is going to work for that playstyle if that's what you're wanting to do. Now heading over to the console, this is the sequential warhead loader, and I should note for testing all of the consoles and traits today, I just took them in on my mirror angle into solo ISCs and just did a couple runs to see how they'd perform. And for this one, this ended up doing pretty well. So this console is going to shoot off a salvo of torpedoes. The first 3 disable the shields on the target for 10 seconds. The second does kinetic damage, and the third does kinetic damage that can also affect other nearby foes within a 2.5 kilometer radius. So looking at the parse here, the second salvo of torps, the ones that are doing direct damage to the target, those did 38.4k for me. And the AoE ones, the third salvo, those did just under 58k. So for a console off a C-Store ship, that's pretty respectable damage. Now, you might have situations where your target dies before this hits, and if you're using other torp consoles like the Achilles, these might end up competing depending on where you hit them. But overall, it is a good console, and even on a build here, Directed Energy Weapons, in this case Cannon Scatter Volley, it still performed quite well, doing almost 100k in a 2.15 mil run. And here's the visual of these torpedoes. So the ones that take the shields off are blue, the ones doing direct damage are the smaller red, and then the ones that have the AoE damage, they're a bit larger, red-orange right there. So let's take a look at these in flight. So really awesome effect there when that goes off. And just a couple of notes with this console. The torpedoes from this do have a bit of a slower travel time. The target in some situations may die before the torpedoes land. Thankfully, these torpedoes can still land and do their thing. They can even seek out a different target, but that is just something to be aware of. And if you're moving around really fast, I have seen some instances where I had the AoE torps land before the shield ones. So this is a console I would not put on my spam bar. I would try to manually hit this against bosses or large targets where you're going to be able to benefit from that shield offline effect, or to benefit from the AoE hitting as many enemies as possible. If you want to spam bar it, I imagine you'll still be able to get a bit from it, but definitely one where if you want to get the most from it, you're going to want to time it a bit. And then the Starship trait is Clear for Action. When you activate Evasive Maneuvers, gain 25% firing cycle haste for all weapons for the entire duration of Evasive Maneuvers. So if you're running the Emergency Con hologram and emergency powered engines, that means you can reset the cooldown of evasive down to 0 every 30 seconds, which basically means 8 out of every 30 seconds of uptime. That is 26.6 repeating percent uptime. And if you then multiply that by the percentage of haste here, that comes out to an average of 6.6 repeating haste on average. Unfortunately, that is quite low, and while I was running this trait, I did not see any noticeable improvement for my weapons, especially given that I'm already running quite a bit of firing cycle haste on my builds. And if you compare this to some of the other haste buffs that we have out there and haste traits, look at Temporal Tunneling off the Atlantis. That has 1/3 uptime, but that's 100% firing cycle haste for 5 seconds. And then when you average that out for the 1/3 uptime, that's 33%. So 5 times better than what we're getting with this trait. The difference is this clear for action is affecting all weapons, whereas Temporal Tunneling was just for energy weapons. But still, even with that trade-off, I think that the percentage on clear for action needs to be much, much higher. Now, just to put some numbers up on screen for this, in order for clear for action to match temporal tunneling, given the uptime difference, clear for action would need to have a haste buff of 125%. Now, given it is impacting all weapons, including torpedoes and mines, I think you can give it a lower value, but I think at a minimum, it needs to be 4 times what it currently is, so 100% firing cycle haste. Next up is the Corolla Temporal Battlecruiser. So this has a 4/4 weapon setup, and I know not everyone's a fan of that, but especially with the turret bug having now been addressed, that's not as big of an issue as it was just a couple weeks ago. And for the bridge officer setup, this has a lieutenant tactical, a lieutenant commander tac, an ensign psi, a commander inge with temporal operative, and a lieutenant commander universal with command. Now, the downside to this bridge officer setup is with the Lieutenant Commander Universal, you do have to pick between running a Gravwell 1, Concentrate Firepower 3, or a Suppression Barrage 1. You cannot take advantage of that third slot for a command ability and Gravwell 1 at the same time. Now, thankfully, with this having a temporal operative commander, you can run a Timeline Collapse 3 and use that as a substitute for a Gravwell. It's not a perfect replacement, but it's better than nothing. And that would still allow you to then run Concentrate Firepower 3 or Suppression Barrage 1. Now, as for the compatible playstyles, if you want to do Classical Torps on this again, that'll work fine. You could also, again, do a tank on it. It does have a higher hull modifier here, so it's going to be a bit more survivable, though it does only have Suppression Barrage rank 1. I think that hull modifier is going to make up the difference versus Shangri-La. And if you want to do direct energy weapons on it again, the same firing modes as the Shangri-La would work. And with this one, I think you could get away doing Do Psi as well, where you're mixing in some science abilities onto the bridge officer stations there, especially with the temporal operative. That is something you could definitely get away with here. And here are the tooltips for the accessories off the Corolla. These are both focused on buffing up broadside to make that playstyle a bit more competitive. And a quick note, the console and starship trait are both doing phaser damage and are buffed by phaser buffs like your phaser tac consoles or isomags. And the testing I did was on plasma-based setups, so the performance you see would be even higher on the phaser setup. So the console here, broadside combat module, the passive on this is a buff to your broadside arc, plus 25% all damage, cat 1, and then plus 50 all damage resistance rating. And the clicky here is full broadside, 5 foes left and right, up to 10 hits over 5 seconds in those 90-degree arcs to your side, and that's going to do a bit of phaser damage to them. So on a plasma setup, I had multiple solo ISC runs where this console, even on my cannon scatter volley setups, was hitting enough foes that it was doing a substantial amount of damage. This is coming in above the Pavin Omni proc. It had runs, it was coming in above the Credence console, it came in above my hexacannons, my complex plasma fires. This is just straight up one of the best consoles in the entire game right now. And keep in mind, this setup was on a plasma CSV setup where I was focused on keeping my targets in front of me. It was just doing that much damage to the foes that happened to be to my side. And it also had no phaser buffs on it because I was on plasma, so it did that well while I was focused on a different arc and not even running the phaser stuff to buff it up. And then we have the Starship trait, Broadside Beam Support. When you activate either Fire at Will or Beam Overload, firing a beam weapon will fire an additional phaser beam per firing cycle per weapon. This additional phaser will pick a random foe in a 90-degree arc within 5 kilometers from each broadside. So when I was testing this on my mirror angle, I was just using a plasma fire at will setup, and even with me running plasma, not phaser, it did 132k DPS. Now, as powerful as this trait is, just be aware that there is potential that they may end up nerfing it because it's supposed to be going off per firing cycle per weapon, and judging by the number of attacks it has here, it appears to be going off per shot. In its current state, broadside beam support is providing a very nice buff for the broadsiding playstyle, a playstyle that has not been in a very competitive state for most of the past decade. My concern is that if they do go in and make it so this trait only goes off once per firing cycle per weapon, then this trait's going to lose the majority of its punch and may fall down to a point where it's not even worth running. So personally, I'd rather they update the tooltip to reflect it working per shot. I think that would be best for that broadsiding playstyle, which has not been in a great state for the past decade. And the next ship here is the Pioneer 2 Pilot Heavy Frigate. This has a 5-3 weapon setup, and the bridge officer setup on this is a Commander Inge with Pilot, Lieutenant Commander Uni with Merc Worker, Lieutenant Commander Universal, Lieutenant Universal, and Ensign Uni. With this being a frigate, you of course have a very flexible bridge officer setup, and the only downside here really is the specialization combo. Pilot and Merc Worker is just not a very strong combination. It's still, sufficient to get you through anything the game has in it, but definitely the weakest dual specialization combo I can think of on a ship. And as for what that's going to be good for, pretty much just do again. So beam overload, fire at will, can scatter volley, can rapid fire. And the console here is Ridge System. This is going to fire a bunch of torpedoes out, decloak foes if they're cloaked, disable their weapons. The issue is it's not currently scaling with damage buffs, and as such, you can see it's down here at 691 DPS on a run where I did 1.95 million. So in its current state, it's not worth slotting. Hopefully this is something we see addressed here in the next week or so. But as is, that's just a joke. And next up is the Starship trait, A Call to Arms. When you're surrounded by more than 7 enemies within a 10-kilometer radius, it spawns in a Pioneer 2 frigate to assist you in combat. There's a 15-second lockout before it can summon in another, but you can have up to 3 of these out at a time. Now, when it comes to the performance, this is unfortunately one of the weakest Starship traits I've ever used. With 2 of them out, they did less than 1,000 DPS combined in a run where I did 2.24 million DPS. Now, overall, the Pioneer 2 has been a very huge disappointment. A secondary Merc Worker seat just always sort of sucks. The ship itself, I can't say the ship sucks because it's still plenty good to get you through anything the game has in it, but the accessories from it sure do suck. Now, the only redeeming factor is, for right now, there is an experimental weapon you can claim in the Events Reclaim store if you own the Pioneer. It's this Dilithium Destructor Charge. It sounds like they're probably going to remove it from what I'm hearing, and they may even be pulling it from our inventories when they remove it. But at some point in the development pipeline, they must have planned to have an experimental weapon on the Pioneer 2. And this experimental weapon, I really wish it would stay, because it is the best experimental weapon in the game right now. Here it is doing, a substantial chunk of that damage on the fall run I did earlier. 433k there, and then another 27k down here. So, I really like that experimental weapon, and if they do end up pulling it, hopefully we see it return sometime in the very near future, and hopefully with very similar performance, because I like them numbers. Them's big numbers right there. And next up is the Ark Royal Intel Science Carrier. Now remember, I already did a video on this ship a couple weeks ago because it leaked out early. And most of my discussion from that video is still relevant now. This is a 3-3 science carrier. It does have a secondary deflector. And for the bridge officers, Commander South Intel, Lieutenant Commander South Temp Op, Lieutenant Commander TAC, Lieutenant Universal, and Ensign Engineer. So the Ark Royal is going to be good for exotics, support builds. You could even do a carrier build on it if you wanted. And I don't have it listed here, but it would also be perfectly fine for doing a do build. You can easily set up a CSV setup on it, fire at will, whatever you want. And next up is the console off the Ark Royal, Scatter Packs and Weasels. Passives on this are 15% max shield capacity and 5% shield resistance. The Clicky is the only one in the bundle that has a 1-minute cooldown, and this is going to summon in 4 Scatter Pack Shuttles and 4 Wild Weasels. The Wild Weasels are going to attack and taunt foes, and the scatter packs are going to move to untargeted enemies and explode into multiple warheads. The Wild Weasels are actually pulling a little bit of threat in runs where I had this console equipped and was just spam barring it on a high uncon setup. I had very high uptime on it because of the 1 minute recharge, and I saw about 20% less incoming damage thanks to the Wild Weasels. Sadly, the scatter packs have failed to deliver on the damage side of things, resulting in this console doing a total of 7.4k DPS on a run that was 2.34 million. Now, there have been some issues with the scatter pack scaling. There was a fix in the patch for them, but I do suspect that that is still an issue. You can see the max 1 hits were quite low, much lower than the Wild Weasels. So that is probably a contributing factor to this poor performance. But as is, this console would need to be doing at least 10 times what it's doing right now for me to consider slotting it on some of my builds. And next up is the Starship trait Mine All Mine. So whenever you use the Hangar launch command, it's going to summon in 3 mines. Regardless of how many pets are launched by that hangar, it's always going to be just 3 mines. And it's going to teleport those mines to the furthest foe and deal kinetic damage to them and any other targets within a 1 kilometer sphere. And for testing this, I've only used it on my Mir Strikewing Escort so far, and with that I'm on Type 7s, which I can launch every 18 to 20 seconds, and with that 1 bay of Type 7s, it did 1.9k. So I suspect on a full carrier build, where you have Hangar recharged off so you can spam the launch command every couple of seconds, it'll do a bit better in that scenario, but still I suspect the damage is not going to be good enough to be worth slotting long term, and that is something I'm going to be exploring in the full review of the Ark Royal in the next 1 to 2 weeks. And to wrap things up, the 15th bundle is not the best bundle we've ever seen, but it's also far from the worst. Now, if you're interested in the bundle, if you're willing to be patient and potentially wait a couple of months, I would recommend waiting for a future 35% bundle sale. You'll save about 20 bucks in Zen by doing that. And by waiting, you're also going to be able to see, what deck it does to the bundle, because there's some stuff in here that is really powerful right now and some stuff that is underpowered. So by waiting a little bit, you'll be able to see what the actual final product is once they've had a few patches to go at things. Now, as for those of you looking to pick up ships standalone, the recommendation right now is the Ark Royal for the platform if you're into the Uncon Psi playstyle, and then the Corolla for the accessories, but there's a big asterisk on the Corolla in that they could end up nerfing both the console and trait based on how good the performance is right now. Again, the console, it's just really powerful. The trade-off for it is that it's only up for 5 seconds every 2 minutes, but you can, of course, uncon and Voven it to get it up sooner. So the better you time it, the more rewarding it is. And the Starship trade off the Corolla, again, remember that it is currently going per shot when it's supposed to be per cycle. Now, if they fix that, that trait is going to take a big hit and probably won't be worth running. So hopefully they leave it alone to boost the broadsiding playstyle. But again, with the wording on the tooltip, there is a very strong chance that that trait may take a hit. Ultimately, this bundle focuses more on the fun and theme side of things rather than performance, and that's perfectly fine. If you want to pick it up for that reason, there's nothing wrong with that. At the end of the day, this is a game and it's about having fun, so if that's going to enable you to have more fun in the game, then do it. But regardless if you're going for the full bundle or just going for the performance options, the Corolla and the Ark Royal, I'd recommend just waiting a little bit, wait at least till the end of the sale to see what they do with the upcoming patches. We don't know how Deca is going to approach balancing issues, and there's some things that are really powerful here and some that are really underpowered. So I think waiting to see how they react and balance things might be a wise move. But that's going to be it for today, so let me know what you guys think of this bundle down below, and if you've had any different results testing out the accessories, please let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you to all channel members and viewers for the continued support. See you guys around.